Enlightenment Through War, The Spiritual Lessons Hidden Inside Humanity's Greatest Conflicts, by David Russo. War reveals humanity at its worst, but also at its most awake. Across thousands of years, empires rose and fell through bloodshed, ambition, fear, and conquest. From Alexander the Great, crossing ancient deserts to soldiers freezing in the trenches of World War I. From the chaos of the Civil War to the ashes of Hiroshima, war has shaped not only nations, but the human soul itself. Yet hidden inside every battlefield is a deeper question. Why do humans destroy one another? And more importantly, what can suffering teach us about consciousness, meaning, courage, and spiritual awakening? This is not merely a history of war. It is a journey into the psychology of power, the illusion of control, the endurance of hope, and the search for enlightenment in humanity's darkest hours. Because sometimes, the greatest wisdom is born from catastrophe. Introduction. Human history has always been shaped by conflict, from ancient battlefields covered in dust and steel to modern wars fought with machines. Nations have risen and fallen through violence, ambition, fear, and power. Yet beneath every war lies something far deeper than politics or territory. Beneath every empire, every revolution, and every battlefield is the story of the human spirit itself. War exposes humanity in its rawest form. In times of comfort, people can hide from themselves. They can avoid difficult truths behind routine, distraction, and temporary pleasures. But during war, illusions disappear, fear becomes real, mortality becomes unavoidable. The fragile structures people depend upon begin to collapse. And in those moments, humanity is forced to confront the deepest questions of existence. Who are we when everything is stripped away? What remains when power, wealth, and certainty disappear? Why does suffering seem woven into the story of civilization? Throughout history, some individuals responded to war with hatred, cruelty, and destruction. Others discovered courage they never knew they possessed. Some lost themselves completely. Others awakened spiritually through pain, sacrifice, and survival. This is one of history's greatest contradictions. Humanity's darkest moments have often produced its greatest wisdom. The rise of conquerors like Alexander the Great and Genghis Khan revealed the limitless ambition of the human ego. The Civil War exposed the painful division within a nation, struggling to define freedom and equality. World War I shattered the illusion of human progress as millions perished in mechanized slaughter. World War II forced humanity to confront evil on an unimaginable scale, and the atomic bomb forever changed the relationship between human intelligence and destruction. Yet through every tragedy, another story quietly emerged. Soldiers risking their lives to save strangers, prisoners refusing to surrender hope, leaders choosing forgiveness over revenge, ordinary people discovering extraordinary resilience in the face of unbearable suffering. These moments reveal something profound about the human condition. Even surrounded by darkness, the human spirit still searches for light. This audiobook is not about glorifying war. It is about understanding what war reveals about consciousness, suffering, fear, and awakening. It is about exploring the invisible battles taking place within the human mind, the struggle between ego and compassion, hatred and understanding, destruction and wisdom. For centuries, humanity believed peace could be achieved through victory over others. But history repeatedly teaches the same lesson. External wars often begin with internal conflict. Nations go to war because individuals remain divided within themselves by fear, greed, anger, insecurity, and the desire for control. The battlefield is not only physical, it is psychological, it is spiritual. And perhaps humanity's greatest challenge is not learning how to defeat one another, but learning how to transcend the unconscious patterns that continue to create suffering, generation after generation. Because enlightenment is not found by escaping humanity's darkness. Sometimes it is found by understanding it. Chapter 1. The First Human Wars. Fear, Survival, and Tribal Consciousness. Long before empires existed, before kings wore crowns or armies marched beneath banners, human beings were already at war. The first battles were not fought for glory or ideology. They were fought for survival. Early humans lived in a world ruled by uncertainty. Food was scarce. Nature was unforgiving. Predators lurked in darkness. and neighboring tribes often represented danger rather than friendship. Survival depended on loyalty to one's group. Trusting outsiders could mean death. Over time, the human brain evolved around this constant tension between fear and protection. This was the beginning of tribal consciousness. The earliest wars were not only physical conflicts over land, water, or resources. They were psychological divisions rooted in one powerful idea, us versus them. That mindset would eventually shape the entire course of human civilization. Even today, thousands of years later, humanity still carries the same ancient programming. Nations divide themselves by borders. People divide themselves by religion, politics, race, wealth, and ideology. Although technology has evolved, the deeper patterns of fear remain remarkably similar to those of early tribes. Gathered around fires in the wilderness, humanity often believes it has become civilized. Yet beneath modern society still lives the same instinct for dominance, survival, and separation. Fear became one of humanity's oldest rulers. Fear of starvation, fear of loss, fear of outsiders, fear of death, and fear has always possessed the power to transform ordinary people. Under fear, compassion weakens, judgment becomes distorted, violence begins to feel justified. Throughout history, leaders have understood this truth well. Fear can unite groups quickly because frightened people search desperately for protection and certainty. But fear also narrows consciousness. When people live entirely in survival mode, they lose the ability to see the humanity in others. They become consumed by defense, identity, and control. In this state, wisdom disappears. The mind becomes reactive rather than aware. Many of humanity's greatest conflicts were born not from pure evil, but from unconscious fear left unexamined for generations. Yet hidden inside humanity's earliest wars is an important spiritual lesson. Conflict reveals the state of human consciousness. When individuals are ruled entirely by fear, they create suffering both internally and externally. But when awareness begins to grow, a different possibility emerges. Compassion becomes stronger than tribal identity. Understanding becomes more powerful than hatred. The individual begins to recognize that beneath all labels and divisions, human beings share the same fears, hopes, pain, and desire for meaning. This realization is the beginning of spiritual awakening. Ancient humans fought to survive physically. Modern humanity fights many invisible wars within the mind: anxiety, insecurity, ego, anger, and division. Although the battlefield has changed, the deeper struggle remains the same. Humanity continues searching for safety and power, possessions, and control, while often ignoring the internal fear driving its behavior. The tragedy of history is not simply that wars occurred. The tragedy is that humanity repeatedly failed to understand the consciousness that created them. But history also offers hope. Every generation produces individuals who rise above fear, people who refuse hatred even during violence, people who choose wisdom instead of revenge. These individuals remind humanity that survival alone is not the highest purpose of life. Awareness is, and perhaps the first step toward enlightenment is recognizing that the greatest enemy has never been another tribe, another nation, or another civilization. It has always been unconscious fear within the human mind itself. Chapter 2: Alexander the Great. The illusion of conquering the world. Few names in human history carry the weight of conquest like Alexander the Great. Before the age of 30, he had built one of the largest empires the world had ever seen. His armies crossed deserts, mountains, and foreign kingdoms with relentless determination. Cities fell before him. Nations surrendered. Legends spread across continents, describing a leader who seemed unstoppable, almost superhuman in ambition and vision. Yet beneath the image of greatness was a deeper human story, one that reveals an important spiritual truth about power, desire, and the illusion of fulfillment. Alexander spent much of his life chasing conquest. From an early age, he was taught to seek glory, immortality, and dominance. Influenced by stories of mythical heroes and guided by intense ambition, he believed greatness could be achieved through external victory. Every conquered kingdom became proof of his identity. Every battlefield strengthened the legend he wanted the world to remember. But conquest has a hidden paradox. The more a person gains externally, the more they often discover an emptiness internally that cannot be filled by achievement alone. History suggests that even Alexander himself began to feel this truth. After years of warfare and expansion, exhaustion spread through both his armies and his spirit. Some accounts describe moments where he wept because there were no more worlds to conquer. Whether entirely literal or symbolic, the statement reveals something timeless about human nature. The ego always believes the next victory will bring lasting peace, the next possession, the next achievement, the next title, the next empire. Yet fulfillment constantly moves further away, because external success cannot. Resolve internal unrest. This is one of the central spiritual struggles of humanity. People search endlessly outside themselves for meaning while avoiding the inner world entirely. Alexander conquered nations, but he could not conquer mortality. At the height of his power, he became increasingly aware of death's inevitability. Illness eventually overtook him while still a young man. Despite commanding armies and controlling vast territories, he could not command time itself. The same man feared by kingdoms left the world exactly as every human being does, unable to carry wealth, power, or status beyond death. This realization humbles every empire in history. No matter how powerful a civilization becomes, all external structures eventually fade. Kingdoms collapse, statues erode, names disappear into history. Human beings spend enormous energy trying to control the world around them, while remaining strangers to themselves internally. The spiritual lesson within Alexander's life is not that ambition is evil. Ambition can inspire greatness, discipline, and transformation. But ambition without self-awareness becomes an endless pursuit, with no true destination. A person may conquer entire worlds, while remaining disconnected from peace within their own mind. This pattern continues in modern society. Many people no longer seek conquest through armies, but through wealth, influence, status, and recognition. The battlefield has changed, yet the psychology remains similar. Individuals are taught that happiness exists somewhere outside themselves, waiting to be earned through success. But once success arrives, the mind simply creates another mountain to climb. The cycle never ends until awareness interrupts it. True enlightenment begins when a person understands that inner peace cannot be achieved through domination of the external world. Wisdom emerges when the need to constantly prove oneself begins to dissolve. For some, this realization arrives through suffering. For others, through exhaustion. And for a rare few, through deep self-reflection. Alexander the Great became one of history's most powerful men. But his life also asks one of humanity's most important questions. What is the value of conquering the world if a person never learns how to conquer themselves? Chapter 3: Genghis Khan and the Power of Absolute Will. History remembers Genghis Khan as one of the most feared conquerors who ever lived. From the harsh landscapes of the Mongolian steppes emerged a man who transformed scattered nomadic tribes into the largest contiguous land empire in human history. Entire cities surrendered at the sound of his approach. Kingdoms collapsed beneath the speed and discipline of his armies. To many, he became the symbol of unstoppable force, a leader driven by vision, survival, and absolute willpower. But beneath the violence and conquest lies a deeper spiritual lesson about power itself. Genghis Khan was born into struggle. Before he became a ruler, he experienced abandonment, hunger, betrayal, and hardship. His early life was shaped by suffering and uncertainty. In many ways, these experiences forged his extraordinary resilience. He learned quickly that survival required discipline, adaptability, and emotional control. Weakness could mean death. This is one of the paradoxes of human history. Suffering often creates strength. Pain has the ability to sharpen human focus. Adversity can awaken determination hidden deep within the spirit. Many of history's most influential individuals were shaped not by comfort, but by struggle. Hardship forces people to confront reality without illusion. Yet suffering can also harden the heart. The same pain that creates resilience can create emotional numbness, cruelty, and domination when wisdom is absent. This duality existed within Genghis Khan's rise to power. He united tribes through loyalty, structure, and vision. But he also unleashed unimaginable destruction across civilizations. Entire populations were erased in campaigns designed to spread fear and submission. His life reveals the immense force of human will. When the mind becomes fully committed to a purpose, extraordinary things become possible. Human beings possess enormous untapped power within themselves, the ability to endure, adapt, and overcome overwhelming odds. Most people live disconnected from this deeper strength because fear, distraction, and self-doubt weaken their focus. Genghis Khan understood something many leaders never fully grasped. A unified mind creates powerful momentum. His armies succeeded not only because of numbers or weapons, but because of discipline, strategy, and collective belief. He reshaped the world because his vision became stronger than the fear surrounding him. But absolute will without spiritual awareness becomes dangerous. Power alone does not create wisdom. A person may develop incredible discipline and still remain disconnected from compassion. They may control nations while being controlled internally by anger, fear, or ego. This is why history repeatedly shows powerful leaders creating both order and destruction at the same time. Human strength, when separated from consciousness, often becomes domination. Modern society still worships power in many forms. People admire influence, wealth, status, and control. They are taught to become stronger, faster, richer, and more dominant. But rarely are they taught how to develop inner awareness alongside external power. As a result, many individuals achieve success while remaining internally restless and spiritually disconnected. True enlightenment requires balance. Strength without compassion becomes brutality. Compassion without strength becomes helplessness. Wisdom emerges only when power is guided by awareness. The story of Genghis Khan forces humanity to confront an uncomfortable truth about itself. Human beings are capable of both extraordinary creation and extraordinary destruction. The same inner fire that builds civilizations can also burn them to the ground. The difference lies in consciousness. Every person carries this duality within themselves: the desire to control, the desire to survive, the desire to dominate, and also the capacity to understand, forgive, and evolve. History often focuses on what powerful individuals conquered externally, but spiritual wisdom asks a far deeper question. What forces were they unable to conquer within themselves? Because the greatest form of power has never been the ability to rule over others. It is the ability to master one's own mind. Chapter 4: The Crusades. When religion and ego collide. Throughout human history, religion has often been humanity's attempt to reach something higher than itself. People searched for meaning beyond suffering. They prayed for guidance, peace, forgiveness, and purpose. Spiritual teachings across civilizations spoke of compassion, humility, love, discipline, and the connection between humanity and the divine. Yet history also reveals one of humanity's deepest contradictions. The same beliefs, meant to unite people spiritually, were often used to divide them violently. Few events illustrate this contradiction more clearly than the Crusades. Beginning in the late 11th century, waves of religious wars erupted between Christian and Muslim powers over control of sacred lands. Leaders framed the conflicts as holy missions, convincing thousands that violence could become a pathway to righteousness. Soldiers marched beneath sacred symbols, believing they were serving divine purpose. Entire populations suffered as faith became intertwined with politics, fear, conquest, and identity. But beneath the surface of these wars was a profound spiritual lesson about the human ego. The ego seeks identity through separation. It wants to feel morally superior. It wants certainty. It wants to believe, my side is right, and the other side is wrong. When spiritual teachings become attached to ego, religion transforms from a source of awakening into a tool for division. The problem is not spirituality itself. The problem begins when human beings use belief systems to strengthen pride, control, and power rather than inner understanding. This pattern has repeated throughout history. People often claim to fight for truth while acting from fear. They speak of peace while carrying hatred internally. They defend morality while abandoning compassion. The Crusades reveal how easily human beings can confuse spiritual devotion with emotional attachment to ideology. Once people become deeply identified with a group, nation, or belief system, they may stop questioning their actions entirely. Violence begins to feel justified because it is wrapped inside a narrative of righteousness. This is one of the most dangerous psychological states in human consciousness. A person who openly embraces evil can sometimes be recognized and resisted, but a person convinced they are unquestionably righteous may become blind to the suffering they create. History repeatedly shows that some of humanity's greatest atrocities were committed not only by cruel individuals, but by ordinary people convinced they were morally justified. Spiritual enlightenment requires something far more difficult than blind belief. It requires awareness. True spirituality asks individuals to confront themselves honestly. It demands humility instead of certainty. It teaches that wisdom grows when the ego softens, not when it becomes more attached to identity. Many of history's greatest spiritual teachers emphasized compassion, forgiveness, self-reflection, and inner transformation rather than domination over others. Yet the human mind often prefers certainty over understanding. Certainty feels safe. Uncertainty requires deeper consciousness. The Crusades also reveal humanity's ongoing struggle between external religion and internal spirituality. External religion focuses on rituals, institutions, symbols, and group identity. Internal spirituality focuses on awareness, compassion, presence, and transformation of the self. When the outer structure loses connection with inner consciousness, spirituality becomes hollow. Modern society still experiences similar conflicts today. People continue dividing themselves through ideology, politics, religion, and cultural identity. Social media amplifies outrage and tribal thinking. Individuals attack one another while believing they are defending truth. The battlefield has changed form, but the psychology remains ancient. The deeper lesson of the Crusades is not simply about religion or war. It is about the human tendency to seek power through identity. While avoiding self-awareness, humanity often searches for enemies, externally because confronting the ego, internally is far more difficult. But enlightenment begins the moment a person realizes that spiritual growth is not about proving superiority over others. It is about dissolving the illusion of separation itself. Because beyond every label, every nation, every religion, and every ideology, human beings share the same fragile existence, the same fears, and the same longing to find meaning in a world filled with suffering and uncertainty. Chapter 5: The American Civil War. Division within one soul. The American Civil War was more than a battle over territory or political authority. It was a nation turning against itself. Brother fought against brother. Families were divided. Entire communities collapsed beneath fear, anger, and ideological conflict. Between 1861 and 1865, hundreds of thousands of lives were lost in a war that exposed the deepest wounds within the United States. Beneath the uniforms, speeches, and battlefields was something far more profound, a struggle over the moral conscience of a nation. At its core, the Civil War reflected a truth about human nature itself. Human beings often avoid confronting uncomfortable truths until division becomes unavoidable. For generations, slavery existed as both an economic system and a moral contradiction. A nation built upon ideals of freedom simultaneously denied freedom to millions of human beings. The tension grew year after year, because unresolved injustice does not disappear, simply because people choose not to face it. What remains hidden internally eventually emerges externally. This applies not only to nations, but to individuals. People suppress pain. They avoid truth. They hide fear, guilt, resentment, and emotional conflict beneath distraction and routine. But eventually, the inner division demands resolution. The Civil War became a mirror of this psychological reality. The nation itself was divided between opposing visions of humanity, power, and freedom. One side fought to preserve a system rooted in control and hierarchy. The other struggled to redefine the meaning of liberty and unity. Like all deep conflicts, the war revealed not only political disagreement, but the battle between fear and moral evolution. Transformation often begins with discomfort. Throughout history, societies rarely change during periods of complete comfort. Growth emerges through crisis because crisis forces confrontation. In the same way, spiritual awakening often begins when a person can no longer ignore the conflict within themselves. Pain becomes the catalyst for awareness. One of the most spiritually significant figures of this era was Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln carried enormous emotional and psychological weight throughout the war. He witnessed unimaginable suffering while attempting to hold a fractured nation together. Yet despite immense pressure, he often spoke with humility, compassion, and reflection rather than hatred. His leadership revealed an important truth. Strength does not always appear as aggression. Sometimes true strength appears as endurance, patience, and moral clarity during chaos. Lincoln understood that hatred alone could not heal division. Even in war, he recognized the danger of becoming consumed by vengeance. Near the war's end, his words reflected spiritual maturity rather than triumphal pride. He understood that rebuilding required more than victory on the battlefield. It required healing the consciousness of the nation itself. This lesson remains deeply relevant today. Modern society is still divided by ideology, identity, race, politics, and fear. People increasingly define one another as enemies rather than human beings. Conversations become battles. Compassion weakens beneath outrage and certainty. The external divisions visible in society often reflect unresolved internal conflict within individuals themselves. When people are disconnected internally, they seek conflict externally. The Civil War teaches that unity cannot exist where truth is denied. Healing requires honesty. Growth requires confrontation with injustice, fear, and unconscious behavior. This process is painful both individually and collectively, but avoidance only deepens suffering over time. Spiritual enlightenment does not mean avoiding conflict entirely. Sometimes transformation requires difficult confrontation, but enlightenment changes how conflict is approached. It replaces hatred with awareness. It seeks understanding instead of destruction. It recognizes that even those on opposing sides remain human beings shaped by fear, conditioning, and suffering. The deepest lesson of the Civil War may be this: a divided nation reflects a divided consciousness, and peace becomes possible only when humanity develops the courage to confront the truths it has spent generations trying to avoid. Chapter 6, World War I, The Death of Innocence. When World War I began in 1914, many believed the conflict would be short, glorious, and honorable. Young men marched into battle carrying ideals of patriotism, courage, and national pride. Governments promised victory. Crowds celebrated in city streets as soldiers departed for the front lines. Few could imagine the reality waiting for them in the trenches of Europe. What followed was unlike anything humanity had experienced before. Machine guns tore through human bodies with industrial efficiency. Artillery explosions shook the earth for days without pause. Poison gas drifted silently across battlefields, blinding and suffocating soldiers where they stood. Millions lived in muddy trenches surrounded by death, fear, disease, and psychological exhaustion. Entire generations witnessed suffering on a scale that shattered humanity's belief in progress and civilization. World War I became the moment innocence died. Before the war, many societies believed modern advancement would naturally lead humanity toward peace and enlightenment. Technology, science, and industrial growth were celebrated as symbols of human evolution. But the war revealed a devastating truth. Intelligence without consciousness can become destruction on a massive scale. Humanity had advanced technologically faster than it had evolved spiritually. This imbalance remains one of the greatest dangers in human history. The same human mind capable of creating beauty, medicine, and innovation is also capable of mechanizing suffering when disconnected from compassion and awareness. World War I exposed the shadow hidden beneath modern civilization, the realization that progress alone does not transform human consciousness. The trenches also revealed something deeper about suffering itself. For many soldiers, constant exposure to death destroyed old assumptions about meaning and identity. Traditional ideas about glory and hero collapsed beneath endless violence. Men returned home psychologically shattered, carrying invisible wounds that society at the time barely understood. Today, this suffering would be recognized as trauma, but during that era many endured it silently. Trauma changes consciousness. When human beings experience extreme suffering, the mind begins questioning reality itself. Some become consumed by despair and emotional numbness. Others begin searching for deeper meaning beyond ordinary existence. This is why periods of collective suffering often produce profound, philosophical and spiritual reflection. Pain forces questions that comfort allows people to avoid. Why are humans capable of such destruction? What is the meaning of life in the presence of death? How fragile is civilization? What truly matters when everything familiar disappears? World War I forced humanity to confront mortality directly. In the trenches, status, wealth, and social identity lost much of their meaning. Death equalized everyone. Under constant uncertainty, many soldiers developed a heightened awareness of the present moment because the future could no longer be guaranteed. This awareness contains an important spiritual lesson. Human beings often live as though life is permanent. They become distracted by ambition, routine, and endless mental noise while forgetting the fragile nature of existence itself. But suffering has the power to interrupt illusion. It reminds people that life is temporary and deeply uncertain. Paradoxically, this realization can awaken deeper appreciation for life. Moments of peace become sacred. Human connection becomes meaningful. Simple existence becomes extraordinary. Many survivors of the war returned with a transformed understanding of humanity. Some lost faith entirely. Others discovered compassion through witnessing suffering firsthand. Shared pain broke down certain illusions of separation. Soldiers from different backgrounds experienced the same fear, grief, and longing for survival. This revealed a truth often forgotten during conflict. Beneath nationality, ideology, and identity, human beings are profoundly fragile and interconnected. World War I was not only a military catastrophe, it was a spiritual turning point in modern consciousness. Humanity could no longer pretend that civilization alone guaranteed wisdom. The war exposed the dangerous gap between external advancement and inner development, and perhaps its greatest lesson was this. When humanity ignores the evolution of consciousness, suffering eventually becomes the teacher. Chapter 7, World War II, Evil, Courage, and the Human Shadow. World War II was not only a global conflict, it was a confrontation with the darkest possibilities hidden within human nature. The war consumed continents. Cities were reduced to rubble. Millions of soldiers and civilians perished in violence, unlike anything the world had ever witnessed. But beyond the battles and destruction, World War II forced humanity to ask a terrifying question. How could ordinary human beings participate in such unimaginable cruelty? The rise of Adolf Hitler and the horrors of the Holocaust revealed the destructive power of fear, hatred, propaganda, and blind obedience. Entire populations were taught to view other human beings as inferior, dangerous, or unworthy of existence. Once people were stripped of their humanity in the public mind, cruelty became easier to justify. This revealed one of the most uncomfortable truths about human consciousness. Evil rarely begins as evil in the minds of those committing it. More often, it begins with fear, with division, with resentment, with the desire for control, with the belief that one group's suffering is acceptable for another group's survival or superiority. The war exposed what psychologist Carl Jung described as the shadow, the hidden darkness individuals and societies deny within themselves. The shadow contains anger, insecurity, hatred, greed, and violence buried beneath the image people present to the world. When these unconscious forces remain ignored, they do not disappear. They grow stronger beneath the surface. Under certain conditions, the shadow emerges collectively. Economic collapse, political instability, humiliation, and fear created fertile ground for manipulation in Nazi Germany. People searching for certainty and identity became vulnerable to authoritarian promises. Gradually, compassion was replaced by ideology. Human beings stopped seeing one another as individuals and instead viewed each other through labels and propaganda. This pattern is not limited to one nation or one period of history. The potential for cruelty exists within all humanity. This does not mean every person is evil. It means every human being carries both light and darkness within their consciousness. Spiritual enlightenment is not pretending darkness does not exist. True awakening requires the courage to confront it honestly. World War II also revealed extraordinary examples of human courage and spiritual resilience. Even amid horror, countless individuals risked their lives to protect others. Families hid strangers from persecution. Resistance fighters stood against tyranny despite overwhelming danger. Prisoners endured unimaginable suffering while refusing to surrender their humanity entirely. One of the most profound examples came from Holocaust survivors who, despite witnessing immense cruelty, continued searching for meaning beyond suffering. Some discovered that even when everything external is taken away, human beings still possess the freedom to choose their inner response. This may be one of the deepest spiritual truths revealed by the war. Human beings cannot always control external events, but they can cultivate awareness within themselves. In moments where fear and hatred dominate the world, maintaining compassion becomes an act of spiritual resistance. The war also shattered the illusion that civilization alone guarantees morality. Germany was one of the most advanced societies in the world culturally, scientifically, and intellectually, yet advancement did not prevent brutality. This exposed the danger of developing external progress without inner consciousness. Knowledge is not wisdom. Power is not morality. Intelligence is not awakening. Modern society still struggles with the same shadow forces revealed during World War II. Division, fear-based politics, dehumanization, and ideological extremism continue appearing across the world. Technology amplifies anger faster than understanding. People increasingly retreat into tribal identities, while losing empathy for those outside their group. History warns humanity what happens when unconscious fear overrides awareness. But World War II also offers another lesson, one rooted in hope. Even during humanity's darkest chapter, compassion still existed, courage still existed, love still existed. This reveals something extraordinary about the human spirit. Darkness may be powerful, but it is never absolute. And perhaps enlightenment begins when humanity finally understands that the greatest danger is not the darkness itself, but the refusal to recognize it within ourselves before it spreads into the world around us. Chapter 8 Hiroshima, the moment humanity became godlike. On August 6, 1945, humanity crossed a threshold from which it could never return. When the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, a single weapon unleashed destruction on a scale previously unimaginable. In seconds, an entire city was transformed into fire, ash, silence, and suffering. Tens of thousands of lives disappeared instantly. Many who survived faced radiation sickness, unbearable injuries, and lifelong trauma. 3 days later, another bomb fell on Nagasaki. The world entered the nuclear age. For the first time in history, humanity possessed the power to destroy itself completely. This moment was not only political or scientific, it was deeply spiritual. Hiroshima revealed that human intelligence had evolved faster than human wisdom. Civilization had unlocked forces once associated only with nature itself, the power to erase entire populations in moments. Yet humanity remained emotionally driven by fear, division, ego, and conflict. In many ways, humanity became godlike in power while remaining childlike in consciousness. This imbalance created a new form of existential fear. Previous wars threatened nations and empires. Nuclear weapons threatened civilization itself. Humanity could no longer view war as something distant or temporary. The possibility emerged that human beings might eventually destroy the very world they depended upon for survival. This realization forced humanity into a new psychological era. For centuries, people searched for security through stronger weapons and greater military dominance. But Hiroshima exposed the illusion hidden inside this pursuit. Beyond a certain point, more power no longer creates safety. Instead, it creates collective vulnerability. Humanity's survival became interconnected in ways never before possible. The spiritual lesson hidden within Hiroshima is profound. Power without consciousness becomes dangerous. Science itself is not evil. Knowledge can heal, transform, and improve life. But knowledge without moral awareness becomes unstable. The same intelligence capable of splitting the atom is also capable of losing compassion beneath ambition, fear, and political calculation. This reflects a deeper truth about human nature itself. People often believe external advancement automatically means internal evolution, but technology does not awaken consciousness. Wealth does not create wisdom. Information does not guarantee understanding. Human beings can become highly advanced externally, while remaining emotionally reactive and spiritually disconnected internally. Modern society continues living inside this contradiction. Humanity now possesses extraordinary technological abilities, instant communication, artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, and weapons capable of unimaginable destruction. Yet anxiety, division, loneliness, greed, and violence remain deeply present within the human condition. The outer world evolves rapidly while the inner world struggles to keep pace. Hiroshima also forced humanity to confront the fragility of existence itself. In one flash, ordinary life vanished. Families disappeared. Entire futures dissolved instantly. This revealed how temporary and uncertain human life truly is. People spend years obsessing over status, control, and ambition while forgetting how fragile existence remains beneath all illusion. Spiritual awakening often begins with this realization. Life is impermanent. Nothing external is guaranteed. Every moment carries extraordinary value precisely because it is temporary. For some survivors of Hiroshima, suffering deepened bitterness and grief. For others, surviving such devastation created a deeper reverence for life itself. Many who witnessed unimaginable destruction emerged with stronger appreciation for peace, human connection, and compassion. This paradox appears repeatedly throughout history. Extreme suffering can either close the human heart or awaken it. The choice often depends on consciousness. Hiroshima stands as one of humanity's greatest warnings. It reminds civilization that external power without internal wisdom creates enormous danger. The future of humanity will not depend solely on scientific progress, military strength, or technological innovation. It will depend on whether human consciousness evolves alongside them, because the greatest threat to humanity has never been knowledge itself. It is unconsciousness holding power it is not spiritually prepared to carry. Chapter 9: Vietnam, the War of Perception and the Fragmentation of Truth. The Vietnam War marked a turning point in modern conflict not only on the battlefield, but in the human mind. Unlike earlier wars defined primarily by physical fronts and clear territorial objectives, Vietnam unfolded within a far more complex arena. Perception, media, ideology, and psychological endurance. It was a war where images mattered as much as events, where narratives shaped reality, and where truth itself became fragmented under competing interpretations. For the first time in history, large portions of the public experienced war in near real time through television. Families gathered in living rooms while images of combat, casualties, and political turmoil entered everyday life. The distance between war and civilian consciousness collapsed. Conflict was no longer something happening over there. It became psychologically immediate. This shift changed humanity's relationship with war itself. In earlier eras, wars were often understood through delayed reports, official statements, and limited perspectives. In Vietnam, perception became fluid and contested. Governments communicated one version of reality, while journalists, soldiers, and citizens experienced others. As a result, trust in authority structures began to fracture. This war revealed a deeper spiritual and psychological truth. Human beings do not experience reality directly as much as they experience interpretations of reality. The battlefield extended beyond jungles and rural villages. It entered language, media, politics, and consciousness. Information became a tool of influence. Images carried emotional weight capable of shaping public opinion instantly. In this environment, certainty became increasingly difficult to maintain. As the war prolonged, moral clarity also began to dissolve for many observers. Unlike conflicts framed as clear struggles between good and evil, Vietnam exposed complexity. Soldiers often found themselves in situations where distinctions between combatants and civilians, protection and harm, survival and morality were blurred. This ambiguity created deep psychological strain. Many returned home, carrying not only physical injuries, but also emotional and existential confusion. This internal conflict is central to the human experience of war. When external clarity disappears, the mind must confront uncertainty within itself. For many individuals, this led to disillusionment. Institutions that once represented authority and truth were increasingly questioned. Public trust weakened. At the same time, awareness grew that large-scale systems, political, military, and informational could shape perception in powerful and sometimes contradictory ways. Yet within this fragmentation, another truth emerged. When external certainty collapses, consciousness is forced inward. Many people began questioning not only the war, but the deeper structures of belief that shape human understanding. What is truth when every source conflicts? What is morality when every perspective carries suffering? What is identity when national narratives no longer feel absolute? These questions move beyond politics into spiritual inquiry. The Vietnam War also highlighted the psychological cost of prolonged conflict. Soldiers and civilians alike experienced stress, trauma, and emotional disorientation. The human mind, when exposed to sustained fear and uncertainty, begins adapting in protective ways, numbing emotion, fragmenting memory, or detaching from experience. These mechanisms allow survival, but they also reshape consciousness. In this sense, war does not only damage bodies and cities, it reshapes perception itself. At the same time, the Vietnam era gave rise to powerful movements of reflection, protest, and moral questioning. People began openly challenging authority and demanding accountability. This cultural shift reflected an awakening, awareness that systems of power must be examined, not simply obeyed. Spiritual understanding emerges not only through silence and meditation, but also through confrontation with illusion. When narratives break down, individuals are forced to ask deeper questions about truth, compassion, and the nature of human suffering. The core lesson of Vietnam is not simply about war or politics, it is about the instability of perception itself. What we call reality is often shaped by limited viewpoints, emotional reactions, and collective narratives. When those narratives fracture, confusion arises, but so does the possibility of deeper awareness. Because when outer certainty dissolves, a fundamental question remains. If truth is not found in external authority alone, then where does understanding truly begin? Chapter 10: The Final War, Humanity Against Itself. In earlier ages, war was something that happened between nations, empires, and armies. It had borders, uniforms, and defined battlefields. But in the modern world, the nature of conflict has changed. The most significant battles are no longer only physical, they are psychological, informational, and internal. The final war is not between civilizations, it is within consciousness itself. Humanity now lives in a state where conflict is no longer confined to distant lands. It exists in daily communication, in digital spaces, in political discourse, and even within the individual mind. Information moves faster than reflection. Opinion spreads faster than understanding. Emotional reaction often replaces contemplation. In this environment, perception becomes unstable. People no longer experience a single shared reality. Instead, reality fragments into competing narratives shaped by ideology, identity, and emotion. Each group constructs its own version of truth, often reinforced by selective information and digital reinforcement loops. The result is not only disagreement, but increasing psychological separation. This is where the deeper war takes place, not on battlefields, but within attention itself. The human mind is constantly pulled in different directions: fear, desire, outrage, ambition, comparison, and distraction. Modern life amplifies these forces through constant stimulation. As attention becomes fragmented, inner silence becomes rare, and without silence, awareness weakens. Spiritual traditions throughout history have pointed to the importance of inner stillness, not as escape from life, but as a way of seeing clearly, because without clarity, human beings become reactive rather than conscious. They respond to the world from conditioning instead of understanding. The final war, then, is the struggle between unconscious reaction and conscious awareness, between inherited patterns and awakened perception, between ego-driven identity and deeper understanding. Throughout history, humanity has repeatedly externalized its inner conflicts. Fear becomes an enemy, anger becomes a cause for war, division becomes institutionalized. But the underlying source often remains unexamined, the unobserved mind itself. When individuals are disconnected from inner awareness, they seek certainty outside themselves. They attach to ideologies, and narratives that provide identity and psychological stability. But this attachment often deepens division. because identity built on separation inevitably creates opposition. Yet even within this fragmentation, something remarkable persists. Human beings are still capable of reflection, still capable of compassion, still capable of recognizing suffering in others as their own shared condition. This capacity suggests that beneath layers of conflict, something in human consciousness remains fundamentally interconnected. The same awareness that experiences fear in one person recognizes fear in another. The same suffering that exists in one place echoes across all human experience. The final war, therefore, is not only destructive, it is also revealing. It exposes the limits of unconscious living. It shows what happens when intelligence advances without inner clarity. It demonstrates how easily fear can scale through systems of communication and technology, but it also creates conditions for awakening, because when conflict becomes internal and universal, avoidance becomes impossible. Every individual is eventually faced with the same question: am I acting from awareness, or am I reacting from conditioning? Spiritual enlightenment does not end external conflict immediately, but it changes the source from which human beings engage with the world. Instead of being driven entirely by fear, identity, or unconscious impulse, a new possibility emerges: response rooted in clarity rather than reaction. In this sense, the final war is also a turning point, not toward destruction alone, but toward potential transformation. Humanity stands at a threshold where it can continue repeating cycles of unconscious conflict, or begin cultivating a deeper level of awareness that transcends them. The outcome is not predetermined, because the battlefield has always been consciousness itself, and within consciousness, awareness remains the only force capable of ending the war without creating a new one. Conclusion: beyond the battlefield, across the long arc of human history, war has been one of the most defining forces shaping civilization. From the earliest tribal conflicts driven by fear and survival, to the rise of conquerors like Alexander the Great and Genghis Khan, to the ideological and global wars of the modern age, humanity has repeatedly expressed its deepest struggles through conflict. Yet beneath every battle, every empire, and every act of destruction or resistance, there has always been something else unfolding: the evolution of consciousness. War reveals humanity in its most raw and unfiltered state. It strips away illusion and exposes what remains when comfort disappears: fear, courage, cruelty, compassion, confusion, and clarity. It shows both the depths of human suffering and the unexpected heights of human resilience. In doing so, it forces questions that cannot be avoided forever. What are we becoming? Why does suffering repeat across generations? And what lies beneath the patterns that seem to shape human history? When viewed only externally, history appears as a cycle of rise and fall of nations, leaders, and civilizations competing for survival and dominance. But when viewed inwardly, another pattern becomes visible. Each era of conflict reflects a corresponding state of human consciousness. Fear becomes violence, ego becomes domination, division becomes war, and unconsciousness becomes suffering on a collective scale. But history also reveals something quietly powerful. Even in the darkest moments, awareness never disappears completely. Within every war, there are individuals who choose compassion over hatred, understanding over revenge, and restraint over destruction. There are those who protect life at great personal cost, who question orders that violate conscience, who refuse to lose their humanity even in environments designed to erase it. These individuals remind us that consciousness is not entirely determined by circumstance. There is always a choice within awareness. As humanity has advanced technologically, its capacity for both destruction and connection has grown exponentially. Science has expanded human ability. Communication has collapsed distance, and knowledge has become instantly accessible. Yet the same unresolved patterns of fear, division, and identity continue to surface in new forms. This suggests a deeper truth. External progress does not automatically create internal transformation. The evolution of civilization depends not only on what humanity builds, but on what it understands about itself. Without inner awareness, even great power becomes unstable. With awareness, even suffering can become a source of insight, compassion, and transformation. Spiritual enlightenment in this context, is not an escape from history or humanity. It is a shift in how reality is perceived and engaged. It is the recognition that much of human conflict arises from unconscious identification with ideas, with groups, with narratives of separation, and it is the gradual realization that beneath all of these forms, there is a shared human experience of consciousness itself. Peace, then, is not only a political condition, it is a state of awareness. It emerges when individuals begin to see beyond inherited fear, beyond reactive emotion, and beyond the need to define themselves through opposition. It grows when understanding becomes more important than winning, and when presence becomes more important than certainty. This does not mean conflict disappears from the world, but it does mean that the source of conflict can be understood, and what is understood can begin to transform. The long story of war is not only a record of human failure, it is also a record of human potential, both unrealized and gradually unfolding. It shows what happens when consciousness is overwhelmed by fear, but also what becomes possible when awareness begins to awaken within it. The ultimate lesson is simple, yet profound. Humanity has never been fighting only external enemies. It has always been engaged in a deeper struggle to recognize itself. And perhaps the end of that struggle does not come through victory over others, but through the awakening of understanding within.